Welcome to this episode of The Wolf and the Shepherd. Today we are going to be talking about the prequels. Now, what prequels? Well, probably the most important prequels that were ever made, and of course we're talking about Star Wars. The Wolf and I were big Star Wars fans. We love Star Wars, and we were actually trying to figure out how is it that we went this long into the podcast and not really actually done a podcast dedicated to Star Wars. And so the Wolf has decided that, we're going to go in order as far as the Star Wars movies are concerned in the Star Wars universe and not when they were released. So today we're going to be talking about the prequels.
I think part of the reason we actually started this podcast was because at some point in time, I knew the Shepherd wanted to talk about Star Wars.
I love talking about Star Wars.
As he said, it's amazing we've gone this far. I would have thought that this would have happened in episode 2 or 3.
Right.
Now, everybody knows Star Wars. Everybody knows it was broken up into 3 different trilogies. But I just wanted to give the listening audience just a little bit of a background on the prequels, because there are always numbers, facts and figures which come up which people aren't aware of. Sometimes people are like, wow, that was more than I expected, less than I expected. But in terms of the background and the success of the prequels compared to the original trilogy, obviously it was quite a time later, and allowing for inflation and everything else and merchandise and probably different channels of distribution in terms of it went to Blu-ray and all this stuff when Blu-rays cost more than DVDs did,
right,
etc. That there was a lot more money to be made with the prequels. Now, the Phantom Menace, the first part of the prequel, came out in
episode one.
Episode 1, the Phantom Menace, came out in May 1999. Attack of the Clones came out May 2002, 3 years later. And then 3 years after that, Revenge of the Sith came out May 2005. Now, it did seem an eternity between episode 6 and episode 1. I actually thought, sure, regardless of the rumors, the prequels would never actually be made.
Oh, well, we all did. Growing up with the original movies, and what Jedi came out in 83, 83 to 99, that was an eternity. And right, there was always those dreams of, are there going to be more Star Wars movies beyond the Ewok adventures and, the droids cartoons and things like that? We always dreamed of the backstory. How is this going to come out? How's Lucas going to explain all of these characters? What were some of the things that the original movies were talking about? Can we hear the backstories? And now all of a sudden, we're going to meet Anakin Skywalker. And we're going to see what happened before he became Darth Vader and all that good stuff. So obviously, the big Star Wars fans, we were all excited about that.
Yeah, and it was actually back in 1992, George Lucas acknowledged that he actually planned to go ahead and create the prequels. And then it was, 7 years later before, the first one came out. So, I mean, that was quite a period of time from his first announcing it, and I think that must have been the slowest period in history of somebody actually having to wait for a movie to come out. As a Star Wars fan, it's like the prequels are going to come out sometime, and year after year went, there was no new information, and then all of a sudden heard that scripts were being written. It was going into early production. How did you feel when you first heard it was going to become reality?
I think when it really dawned on me was when I ordered a poster, and I still have that poster. It's stored along with all my other Star Wars collectibles somewhere. The poster of Jake Lloyd, who played Anakin in the first movie, or in episode 1 rather, and the shadow of Darth Vader behind him. And I have that original poster. It was, I guess you call it a teaser poster or something like that. I mean, there was no release date. There was no actors' names on the poster or whatever. It's just a picture of Jake Lloyd right there in the desert with that shadow of Darth Vader behind him. I remember getting that poster through the mail and looking at that and being so excited about that movie. Here we are. We're finally going to get to see what happened in the past of the Star Wars saga.
Now, I know most Star Wars fans knew that Anakin Skywalker was going to become Darth Vader, but you have to remember the gap between Episode 6 and Episode 1 was so big that there was a whole generation who came through who didn't really kind of grow up with Star Wars.
Right.
And that poster, the one you're talking about, I also had that poster, I think was dubbed the biggest plot spoiler of all time for those people who weren't that into Star Wars. And remember, he doesn't become Vader until Episode 3.
Right.
And that's, you're going from 1999, Phantom Menace, until 2005. So that's 6 years. And right at the end of the movie, so they've basically done a plot spoiler 6 years in advance.
Sure. Yeah, and of course the way they were making the movies, knowing what already happened in the quote-unquote future, right? They had to kind of explain some things behind, and they did some good explaining, they did some bad explaining. You can talk about the soft, the sloppy, the lazy writing on some of the things. But, of course, when you hear that, introduction, I'm Anakin Skywalker, you're like, well, you only heard that name a couple of times in the original movies. So it's like, okay, here's this guy that becomes Darth Vader, right? The evilest guy to walk around the whole Star Wars galaxy and all this. And then you find out he's just this little farm boy that's a slave. And you're like, well, how in the world did this dude turn into the most feared person in the galaxy, less than the Emperor? And so it was kind of interesting to know, this little slave farm boy, it basically rules the galaxy in the span of a generation.
Yeah, and I think obviously in the original trilogy, there wasn't too much romance in there other than the kind of
you got the Han and Leia thing,
yeah.
but that didn't really even come to fruition.
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit of it in Empire, but most of it in Jedi. But it wasn't the same kind of romance that you saw in the prequels.
Yeah, and romance traditionally wasn't necessarily a big part of sci-fi movies.
Right.
And I think the way George Lucas framed the prequels was I think if those prequels had been written maybe 20 years earlier, the romance theme going throughout them perhaps might not have been so strong.
Sure.
Because the whole thing of Anakin turning to the dark side is really based around Padme. I mean, his jealousy, what he wants and everything, his love for her is driven, pretty much drives most of his actions and motives through the movies. I mean, him turning to the dark side, when he talks to Palpatine and about, him being worried about, Padme dying. And, when Palpatine tells him, you can bring somebody back from the dead, it was like, wow, now I've got the ultimate protection, in this relationship. Even if she dies, if I become a Sith, I can bring her back. But I have often wondered if that prequel trilogy had been filmed 20 years earlier, if maybe that had been the original trilogy, how different that would have been in terms of plot.
Sure, and I don't think the prequel trilogy would have done as well if that was released first.
Right.
It never would have.
Yeah.
I don't think Lucas planned it that way. But I think it was a happy accident that, he realized 4, 5, and 6 were going to be his first movies. Then, you go back and you do 1, 2, 3. And then, of course, later on, you become a sellout. You sell to Disney and let them do 7, 8, 9. And I'm sure, at one point we'll probably talk about those as well. But 1, 2, and 3 would not have been the movies they were without 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, and also you have to consider the prequels were more special effects driven than the original trilogy. I think if you'd have tried to have made the prequels back in 77, that I think maybe
have-
the holes in the script would have been more glaringly obvious. I think
Sure.
the special effects took away from some of the bad scripts in the prequels, whereas the original trilogy, although the special effects were great for that time, you know, we look at them now, or maybe even 20 years ago, and they aged, you know, pretty badly. I mean, we have, you know, all of the Star Wars movies in 4K quality, and watching the original trilogy in 4K is very, very difficult. You
Right.
almost have to put it down to 480p to be able to enjoy the movie in some respects.
Sure, yeah, you can look at the original trilogy right now in, like you say, the 4K, and you can start seeing, you know, some of the quote-unquote bad special effects. But I've heard the story that I did not see the, you know, first movie, Episode 4, in the theater. It was out before I was born, but
That's no excuse.
well, you know, what are you going to do? But I do remember seeing it on TV at home, and still that opening scene was just amazing, and that's what blew most people away with Star Wars. And so Lucas knew that he had to have something very similar to that in the prequel trilogy, with that, wow, look at these special effects. And he has a lot of CGI, a lot of green screen, a lot of all that. But, you know, look, it's the 99, you know, I'm guessing, you know, he's making the movie late 97, you know, through 98, whatever, releases it in 99. Looking back on it 20 years ago, there's a lot of movies that probably try to get that level of CGI and still struggle with it, because he still has that creative ability to make it feel as real as he possibly could with the technology he had available.
Now, you know, every episode I try and get at least one opportunity to prove why you should never be allowed on The Price is Right.
Okay.
And so I wanted to get this. I wanted to get this one in early, and I
Here
think
we
this,
go.
I think this is going to be the only one during this podcast.
Right, another Stump the Shepherd,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
I think you're 50 for 50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the original trilogy, obviously very successful at the box office, and I
Yep.
think at the time they came out, they were the highest grossing movies at that point.
And by the way, my wife will explain to you that I had a hand in that, because
Yeah.
when Episode 1 came out, we saw it 7 times in the theater.
Yeah.
7 times.
Right.
Even though, and I'm sure we're going to get into the reasons why it burns me, but I still watched it 7 times in the movie theater.
Yeah. Now, the original trilogy, take away the re-releases, the releases on DVD, you know, Blu-ray.
Back
all
up,
that stuff.
because releases on VHS. You're
Yeah.
leaving out VHS.
Right. Yeah.
I had 3
Yeah.
copies of
Oh,
it
and
that I bought.
Laserdisc as well.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I wasn't highfalutin like you. We didn't have a laser
Well, I
disc
didn't
player,
either.
but you know, I had 4 copies of the original trilogy on VHS. One that we taped off of television on our Curtis Mathis VCR, and then I had an original set, I had a THX set, and I had a special edition set, all on VHS.
Right. So, the question. How much did the original trilogy earn at the box office alone from their primary runs? Not the re-releases and everything. Combined, the original trilogy.
And now are we talking in, you know, late 70s, early 80s dollar figures?
Well, yeah, 77
Okay.
through 82, 83, whatever it was. Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to guess $500 million.
It 500 million?
Yeah.
No, it was actually 1.2 billion, which
Wow.
was actually, I thought,
That's
quite a
huge.
lot less.
Really?
Now I know it was, you know, 40 odd years ago.
Well, that and of course that's why I went with like
And
half
not
a
adjusted for
billion
inflation.
dollars,
Yeah,
not adjusted for inflation.
inflation.
Yeah. Okay. So what was the number again?
1.2 billion.
That's huge though.
Now take into account.
And that's just the box office.
Yeah, take into account Avatar. I think was something like just under 2 billion worldwide at the box office by itself.
I hate Avatar.
Yeah,
That's a Canadian movie.
I'm not that impressed with Avatar.
Yeah, it's a Canadian movie.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of sequels, I am well, I mean, obviously we're both looking forward to the Velocipaster 2
Yes.
more than Avatar 2.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think they ought to take just take 1% of the budget from Avatar 2 and give it to the guy
Right.
making Velocipaster
Yeah.
2. Just 1%.
Well,
That's not that much.
I had actually read reports that Avatar 2 will actually cost far less to make than the first Avatar movie, just because it's a lot easier now to do those special effects, and because they have obviously the original way of doing it from the first movie, that the second movie it's going to be way cheaper to be able to actually
what are they
going
to do? They're just going to cut and paste. Control C, Control V.
Sure.
That's what
Yeah.
they're going to do with a
Yeah.
lot of it. Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's just, to me, just like an adult version of the Smurfs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, they're the same. They're blue, right? The Avatar people are blue, and the Smurfs are blue. So you're not trying to fool my color blindness. One of them's purple, and you're just trying.
Yeah.
Okay, they're all blue. Okay.
Now, from that 1.2
the
billion,
Oompa Loompas were blue, or were they purple?
I think they were kind of like lack of oxygen type blue.
Oh,
asphyxiation type blue.
Still blue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So with the original trilogy earning 1.2 billion at the box office, how much do you think the original budget for all three movies in the original trilogy was?
Ooh, now, okay, so this might be a little bit of a trick question, because if I remember some of my Star Wars trivia, the budget for the first one wasn't that much, because the studios felt it was going to be a failure. Lucas was trying to stretch the budget then all of a sudden it became this worldwide phenomenon, so he got a bigger budget for Empire and Jedi.
Yeah.
So original budget combined, so I've got to try to think, okay, first movie, low budget, second and third, budget, I'm going to go with $80 million.
Close, 77 million.
Oh, look at me go.
Now, I think...
So, Price is Right rules, I still lose, but hey, I'm getting closer.
Now,
Stump the Shepherd's getting a little bit harder for you, but you did pick a topic where I might know a little bit about what we're talking about.
Now, I think actually by episode 6, the actual actors' wages were far greater percentage of that budget than obviously for episode 4, because they were pretty much unknown for the most part.
If you dig, and of course we're supposed to be talking about the prequels, but I do remember reading something a long time ago that Sir Alec Guinness decided to take a piece of the movie rather than a salary and things like that. So I think that made him some bank.
Well, you think, 77 million and it made 1.2. that's 12 times return roughly right there. And then you're not talking, again, about all the re-releases, the released, DVD.
Well, and even Lucas decided to take the merchandising as his payday. And it wasn't even really the release of the movies. And that's where he made his fortune, was the merchandising off of it. Now, and he invented that. But once again, that's original trilogy. We're supposed to be talking about prequels. See, here's what happens when we talk about Star Wars, because you're going to lead me down all these rabbit holes. So it's your responsibility to keep me on task here.
Well, these are frames of reference.
Okay.
That's our excuse for drifting off.
Okay.
So with the prequels, how much do you think they earned at the box office alone combined?
Just the box office, I'm going to have to say $2 billion. $2 billion with a B.
Right. Now, it's $2.5 billion, but that actually surprised me because it was that much later. I actually thought the number would be far, far greater. I would have thought just the Phantom Menace alone would have got, $1.5 billion by itself,
Yeah. The reason I was probably pretty close on that guess is, not everybody went and saw episode 1 7 times like I did.
Right.
But you did have those Star Wars fans out there that, of course, they saw it once. And now you're talking about the age of DVDs are popular. Digital film is kind of getting there. It's not quite there yet. Most people are still buying... I think in 99 you're still buying VHS, I think.
Yeah.
But you're also getting people that are buying DVDs, so they want to go see the movie in the movie theater.
Yeah.
But they're probably seeing it once, and then they're waiting for the release.
Well, there were
DVD.
There obviously were DVDs in 99 because I remember having movies on DVD. But it did surprise me because you have to remember, like you say, you went and saw the original Star Wars 7 times, but you think
episode 1 7 times.
Yeah. You have to think that many years later, obviously the price of a ticket at the movie theater has gone up.
Sure.
So you'd figure that 2.5 billion combined doesn't really sound like a lot to me.
Yeah, but
I don't know why.
But you also got to remember, and of course, in the age of COVID that we're in now, going to the movies is a little bit different.
Right.
But back then, you've got your release weekend, right?
Yeah.
And so you got whatever they used to call it, where you couldn't use a coupon. They're not going to discount anything. But then it stayed in the movie theater for a long time. Right. So even the other studios, they're bringing out movies, and this was back in the day when I was going to the movie theater at least once a week with, my now wife, my then girlfriend, and I would say, well, there's nothing really good. Let's go watch Star Wars again.
Right.
And because it was Star Wars, I'd go ahead and pay for that ticket. So then you get the matinee price. And then you go to the dollar theater. I mean, remember the dollar theaters? Those are basically extinct now.
We didn't have those in England.
Yeah. Oh, no. We had the dollar theater where, you'd go watch a movie at the dollar theater, and we called it the dollar theater because the ticket was $1. And you'd go do that, and then they even had like 50-cent Wednesdays, so you could go to the theater and see it again. So, I'm not saying when I saw it 7 times, I paid full price. It was probably full price 2 or 3 times, and then probably the dollar theater a couple of times, and maybe on 50-cent Wednesday, we, were bored, and we went to the movie theater, and I forced her to watch it again. She probably, slept through it or whatever. So I'm not surprised that the figures weren't higher because of the way the movie ticket prices went.
Yeah. Now, the budget for the prequels, I'm not going to ask you to guess this because it's one of those things, pick a number between 1 and 12 billion, was actually 343 million, which I think roughly works out at, they made 6 times as much money at the box office as opposed to the original trilogy where they made 12 times as much.
Right.
And again, a lot of those...
yeah, but how much of that, I wonder, was put towards marketing, actors? I mean, yes, you have Liam Neeson, right? He was a legitimate actor back then. You had Ewan McGregor, so you've got a handful of actors. Yeah. Natalie Portman. You've got some names in there.
Yeah,
back when Star Wars was put out, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher kind of had a career, not big. Harrison Ford, that was his second kind of big movie. Yeah. He was in American Graffiti, but, nothing big. Mark Hamill was unknown.
Yeah.
This Sir Alec Guinness, kind of known, but it was like, hey, what's this dude doing in this movie?
Yeah.
And those were your names. And then you had... Grand Moff Talking. What was his name?
Peter Cushing.
Peter Cushing.
Yeah.
But he was more of a British known actor.
Yeah. But very famous though.
Very famous over.
He played Dracula for about 20, 30 years in the Hammer horror.
But famous over in your part of the world.
Yeah.
Same with Alec Guinness.
Yeah.
Famous in your part of the world, not so much over here.
Uh-huh.
So and they filmed the old movies in Pinewood Studios over in England.
And that's
so
the way that
kind of made sense but you bring it over to America, not so many people knew. But you got the prequels, you got some names in there, but Jake Lloyd, nobody knew who he was. Yeah. And you got a handful of other people that floated around in that movie,
Well, Ewan McGregor was decently well known. At least again in England, he was, with like Trainspotting and some other movies.
Exactly.
He was pretty well known.
Liam Neeson was known. Natalie Portman was known. So you've got some names that are popping up here.
Well, Samuel L. Jackson as well. I mean,
exactly. So you got Sam Jackson in the movie. You've got Ian McDermott. We knew who he was. You knew from episode 1, oh, that's the Emperor. It's Ian McDermott. So you've got some people signing on. And then, of course, you got Anthony Daniels playing C-3PO, who was already known for being C-3PO in the movie. He's like, okay, you're going to make me put on this gold suit again. You're going to write me a big fat check, because if you don't write me this big fat check, everybody's going to be a little bit hacked off that you didn't get me as original. And Kenny Baker is R2-D2.
Yeah.
They put him in the movie, even though R2 was a lot of CGI. they still had Kenny Baker in that movie, so they had to cut him a big fat check.
Now, do you think any midget could have played the role of R2-D2?
No. No. I'm thinking maybe Peter Dinklage, but no, not so much. Maybe Brad Williams.
Well, what about R2-D2's great personality convinces you that nobody else could have played the role?
Oh, I love R2-D2.
Oh, I know that.
I know you know I love R2-D2. But
and I know you love midgets, but this is why I thought this was the perfect question for you.
Exactly. That Kenny Baker is R2-D2. I mean, nobody can do it. And once again, not to get down this rabbit hole, but, rest in peace, Peter Mayhew. I know we got the new dude that was playing Chewbacca, but there's just something about knowing Peter Mayhew was in the Chewbacca suit.
I think he walked in a special way,
Yeah, there was something about it.
Yeah.
There was something about R2-D2 and knowing Kenny Baker was in there that just did it for me.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Now, with the prequels, there were obviously some, I want to say, maybe surprises at some of the casting. Now,
okay,
I was kind of a bit apprehensive with Ewan McGregor playing Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Why?
Just simply because, I think outside of Trainspotting, I wasn't necessarily a big Ewan McGregor fan.
Sure.
And I think because we'd waited so long, we all expected these huge name stars playing these roles, and then it was like, oh, Ewan McGregor's going to play, one of the most important roles, in the Star Wars universe.
I think if you to put too many big names in, it kind of ruins what Star Wars is all about, though. Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor were fairly good names, not ginormous names, but fairly big names. And quite honestly, when you talk about the actors that are in the prequels, I mean, look, I'm a huge Samuel L. Jackson fan. Great actor. Honestly, I don't think there's a movie he's made that I didn't like. But I struggled with him in Star Wars.
Yeah.
I still struggle with him in Star Wars to this day because
I thought he fitted perfectly in that role.
Because you look at him and you say, that's Samuel L. Jackson sitting there. I mean, that's Jules from Pulp Fiction. This is not right. There's something that's off here. And he did a good job. He had his purple lightsaber and, the only Jedi apparently in the galaxy that had one, but something was off by him being in that movie.
Now, mildly off topic, did you name your son Jake after the actor who played Anakin in Phantom Menace?
No. Going back to an 80s movie, Jake was named after Jake Ryan from 16 Candles.
Oh, yeah, you told me that
but,
before.
When Mason was born, he was supposed to be named Chewbacca. And
I remember you telling me that.
I had the paperwork filled out in the hospital, and I said, look, why don't we name him Chewbacca Mason? And then we'll call him Mason. And then, my wife, of course, she's Hispanic. I said, we can tell all your family, just call him Chewy. And they're just going to think it's Chuy.
Yeah.
And they're not going to get it. And she wouldn't let me do it.
Wow.
Typical Lisa, won't let me do what I want to do. And even today, I think we regret the decision that we didn't name him Chewbacca.
Yeah, it was amazing I got away with naming my son, giving him the middle name Wolf, to be honest.
There you go. I mean, we every once in a while get that little gift, but rarely do we get it. But
the deal was she chose his first name and I chose the middle name, and the first name she chose, his name is Xander, and that was actually the name of my best friend right from kindergarten. So that was kind of a win-win situation with that. Yep. Now, jumping back on the topic with the prequels, with Anakin, the casting, I think, for the Phantom Menace, I think he did a good job. I think the kid, it'd be hard.
He did a good job.
With the role he was in, you really didn't want somebody that much more charismatic just simply because of his circumstances of being a slave kid. You didn't want somebody who was just going to be popping jokes and it being slapstick, every 2 minutes. So I think that was a good role. But once we get to episode 2 and 3, one of the biggest critiques of the Star Wars universe is the casting of Anakin Skywalker.
Yep. Skywalker, Star Walker. Oh, yeah.
Well, he was originally going to be called something like Star
Killer.
or something. Yeah,
it was Star Killer.
I'm glad they didn't go with that.
Yeah, then it went Skywalker. Yeah. But yeah, not a fan.
Yeah.
Not a fan of him at all.
Now, did you know Leonardo DiCaprio was first offered that role?
In 2 and 3?
Yeah.
That would have been bad.
And he turned it down because he believed he was not a big enough star to appear at that point in his career to star in a franchise as big as Star Wars. Imagine if Leonardo DiCaprio had been Anakin Skywalker.
Early on, I was not a DiCaprio fan. I really wasn't. I tend to remember him from the movie Benny and June.
Yeah, he was in some wishy-washy
and
romance
he
movies.
was in
Romeo
Growing Pains.
Romeo and Juliet.
That stuff,
and
and for a long time, I was
What's Eating
not...
Gilbert Grape? Was he in there with Juliet?
That's the one. I said Benny and June. I meant What's Eating Gilbert Grape.
Yeah, that was what Johnny Depp was in that.
So for a long time, I was not a DiCaprio fan. And then it seemed like DiCaprio turned around and just kind of changed his career a little bit. And I can't peg the movie exactly when it happened. But then, I love seeing him in Django Unchained. I mean, he's fantastic in that movie.
Yeah,
and,
Inception is incredible.
Inception,
The
Revenant,
Shutter Island is fantastic in that.
Just all of a sudden, something happened with DiCaprio, and now I'm a DiCaprio
I think it was
fan.
after Titanic, because I think that was the last of his heartthrob type roles.
You bring that up, and I struggled with him in that movie. Great movie. I liked the movie for the historical aspect and the special effects and watching the boat sink and all that, but I even struggled with him through that movie because I remember when it came out, I was 97, thinking I really want to see a movie about the Titanic, but I don't know if I can put up with Leonardo DiCaprio
I was impressed.
for 3 hours.
I wasn't expecting much. I went with my girlfriend at the time, and I went, if I hadn't have been dating her, there's no way I would have gone and saw it.
Yeah. I know. I remember the first time I saw it, we went to a kind of a late showing, Lisa and I and a couple of friends of ours, and Lisa got mad because the guy that was, the two friends of ours, he was getting bored with the movie. He hated love story movies, and just that scene where the guy is falling off and then smacks into the propeller and spins around.
Yeah.
He started laughing just really loud in the theater and everything. And so I started laughing too because I thought it was funny. And Lisa was not happy about the fact that we were laughing at that part because, the girls, they're all kind of almost crying because everything's sad. And we're like, oh, look at that guy flipping around because he hit the propeller. But going back to... Hayden Christensen, I struggle with him in that movie. He was not a good actor. He did his stunt scenes well, if that was really him, but I still cringe kind of thinking about him in 2 and 3 of how he was supposed to be that representative of one of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time, Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker. And I still, to this day, don't really look at him as Anakin Skywalker.
Now, Paul Walker of the Fast and Furious movies was very interested in the role for Anakin Skywalker, but didn't get it. I think he would have been a great choice. I mean, he's... and it would have probably been better now that he's dead, because Hayden Christensen's still alive. So at least we wouldn't have to worry about some bizarre reboot of Disney making a movie, in between 2 and 3, like, the Clone Wars cartoon or something like that. We wouldn't have to worry about that, but we do have to worry about that with Hayden Christensen. Yeah.
So
now, do you remember how many years Phantom Menace is set before Episode 4?
No, if you look at the timeline of Star Wars from the originals to the trilogy, and you think about how old Luke and Leia are supposed to be, you would have to guess somewhere around 30 years, 30, somewhere between 30 and 35 years would be my guess from 4 back to 1.
Yeah, it's 32 years.
Okay.
Between there. Now, I thought George Lucas had actually sold Lucasfilm to Disney earlier than he actually did. He actually sold it in 2012. But by the time it got to 2015, I think the estimate on how much Star Wars merchandise was worth per year worldwide was between 5 and 7 billion.
Wow.
Now, do you think at that point George Lucas had so much money and just wanted to clear it out, and Star Wars was like, oh, if anybody's going to take this franchise and have the money to send it in the direction I foresaw, it's Disney? Or do you think it's probably one of the most undersold kind of...
Okay, so here's something we rarely do on the show. And I think this is important for this point. 2012 is where he sold Star Wars.
Yeah.
How old was he in 2012?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So we rarely do this, but I'm going to grab my phone here real quick, and I'm going to look up.
Ask Siri. Don't type it. Ask Siri.
We're going to ask Siri?
Yeah.
Oh, this might be a great experiment. So, hey, Siri. How old is George Lucas?
George Lucas is 76 years old.
Okay, so we're in 2020, of course, the age of COVID, right?
So he was 68.
So he was 68. Okay, so the reason I'm bringing this up is, you're 68 years old. You've created Star Wars, you've created Indiana Jones, you've done all this stuff, right? You've amassed this huge fortune, you've had Skywalker Sound, you've done all this.
Yeah.
So at 68, don't you say, okay, $4 billion, I'm good. Even if I live to 100, how am I going to go through $4 billion in the next 30 years?
It depends how many kids and grandkids he has.
Yeah, but am I also kind of tired? I've done this my whole life. I need to retire, just like your normal person who at 68 years old would probably say, maybe I've got 30 years left in me. Maybe, I'm a wealthy man. How much money do I need to live the rest of my life? I really do just want to sit on the rocking chair on the front porch and actually enjoy the fruits of my labor. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And you got to think also that, despite the fact the headliner from that deal was, he sold Lucasfilm for $4 billion, you've got to think he still had some rights, merchandise percentage and movie percentage built into that deal. Just give me 1% of everything.
Yeah, we're never going to know all those details. And of course, like I said, you got to remember, he didn't sell Star Wars to Disney. He sold Lucasfilm, which is Indiana Jones and some other projects that he had. So taking out just that Star Wars portion, I think Disney got a deal. They really got a deal on that. But Lucas got a deal also because he could walk away. He could actually sit back.
But he didn't, though, did he? He still had pretty active involvement.
Well, but that was his choice.
Yeah.
He could have easily sat on that rocking chair on the front porch and said, you know what? I made my money. I'm good. Y'all do with it what you want.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, that's what Disney did.
Yeah.
But another rabbit hole, and we'll probably talk about that later. But let's focus on the prequels.
Now move into probably the most important part of this podcast. For as long as I've known you, obviously known you're a huge Star Wars fan, and also I know it's been a while since you've watched the prequels. But
it has.
But I think that's actually a good
In full
thing.
disclosure, I have not watched any of the prequels in years.
Yeah. So for the listeners who perhaps might not necessarily be great Star Wars fans, and also those who are very, very nerdy about Star Wars, I want to have the Shepherd's breakdown, plot, and what he thought of each of the prequels. So going from like the Phantom Menace, just break down the plot as you understand it, and also what you thought overall of that movie, but kind of avoid, kind of plot holes and don't go on
Right.
about Jar Jar too much before, because we're going to break the cursing rule if we go on about him too much.
Jar Jar is Canadian as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So, episode 1, you've got this political junk going on, and it's almost like Lucas tried to confuse everybody by saying, hey, let's throw some politics into the mix here. Let's talk about the Trade Federation and blockades and political discourse. So, the Jedi, they're in power, and so what do? The council or whatever, they say, hey, let's go send some dudes over there and do some negotiations. Next thing you know, Civil War almost breaks out. You meet a little slave boy on Tatooine because, you got to escape this planet. You go ahead and do a pod race, and all of a sudden this slave boy who's never actually finished a race somehow wins the race. You get off the planet, and you save Naboo. And next thing you know, now we're going to watch this little slave boy figure out what he's going to do. Palpatine is sitting there like, oh, I know what you're going to do. I see this. I know what you're going to do. I get that. So that would be the plot of episode 1. And then you go to episode 2.
So we completely missed out Darth Maul and everything else.
Darth Maul is one of those characters that didn't get enough screen time. And now they've tried later on to try to resurrect him and everything, and that's kind of frustrating. But and maybe I shortchanged episode 1 a little bit. I mean, there's some great lightsaber battles and all that good stuff. And
well, you missed out the whole prophecy thing and about him bringing balance to the Force as well. That was a very important part of that movie.
See, I don't believe that though. I believe the balance to the Force was actually Leia. So that's why I didn't bring it up.
But I'm saying that
they
was
got
in the movie, though.
They got the prophecy wrong
Right.
in that. The prophecy was still there, but no, Anakin wasn't the one that brought balance to the Force. Ended up being Leia later on. Changed my mind on that. I know I'm correct. But that's basically episode 1, right? And of course it's a setup movie too. It's like, oh, okay, Anakin magically makes C-3PO. And doesn't put any skins on him, anything, but, obviously sees him. I mean, I think in Empire Strikes Back...
Yeah, don't go there yet.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
No plot holes.
Yeah, but, and also, we start the introductions, right? We meet C-3PO, we meet R2-D2, we meet Obi-Wan Kenobi, so it's like, oh, okay, so here's where these people are coming
and
from,
maybe
right?
even Yoda. Let's not forget Yoda.
Yeah, true. So then we go to episode 2, and that's episodes 2 and 3. I'm going to be honest with you. I struggle a little bit in my memory of exactly what happened on those. I've seen them multiple times, watched them with my kids and everything, but I just don't watch them all that often anymore. But, I remember when episode 2 came out and, it was called Attack of the Clones. I'm like, oh, so the Clone Wars. So we're finally going to figure out what the Clone Wars are.
It's referenced in episode 4.
And so now we're going to get to figure out exactly what this is. And episode 2 to me, giant mess. It was an entertaining movie. I didn't take a whole lot from episode 2. It's probably, of all the Star Wars movies, outside of the final movies, because I've watched episode 8 exactly twice, episode 9 I think twice, but if you go back to the prequels, I probably watched episode 2 10, 15 times, episode 3 more than that. But when I watched episode 2, it's been years ago. Just don't remember too much about it. It's really kind of a blur to me. You meet Jango Fett, and then you say, oh, look, little Boba Fett. Oh, look at him. Look how cute he is. And then you find out, okay, well, the clone troopers are clones. Makes sense. That's why they're called clone troopers. But just kind of weak on that side, but some good action scenes. Then you get to episode 3. Well, wait. at the end of episode 2, of course, you've got the marriage, the secret marriage between Anakin and Padme. And Anakin doesn't like sand, and Anakin likes to lay in a field full of flowers and say, "Oh, I love you," and all that, and just shoot me in the head. So then we go on to episode 3, and now it's, Revenge of the Sith, and here we go, and you know that you're going to get to see Vader, and Obi-Wan has the high ground. I mean, that battle on Mustafar, that lightsaber battle, it's probably the best part of that movie. Watching that and seeing the pain. But then towards the end of the movie, you look and you say, oh, all this technology all around me, and I die in childbirth because I don't have the will to live. It's like, really? They don't have a button somewhere that's let me give you will to live. Click here. Yeah. Okay, and now you're going to live.
But that's how I felt watching episode 8. Almost lost the will to live.
Yeah, exactly. We have all this technology. We can cut your arm off and then put a new arm on there. And we can cut your leg off, put a new leg. In fact, in episode 3, I mean, Anakin's a burnt up little crisp, right? He's a pizza that you left in the oven all night long, and somehow we can magically make him live, but we can't figure out how to give somebody the will to live. Sorry, not buying that. Just not buying it.
Okay. Well, as an alternate recap of the prequels, basically, if the Shepherd had had more time to think about it, it would have gone something like this. Some people are flying in space. They land somewhere, and there's a funny-looking queen with really weird makeup, and she looks really young.
And goofy clothes.
And some droids turn up, don't know where they came from, start causing trouble. Then some even funnier-looking people start making outrageous trade demands. This guy with a really funny painted face turns up periodically, keeps trying to ruin everything for everybody. This young kid who looks like he's living in the Sahara Desert races this floating car that he's made, somehow wins a race. The two heroes who we were originally introduced to manage to get to fly off the planet. They meet some really tall, gangly, annoying character who curses our lives for the next 6 or 7 years. Then at the end, everything's happy, and we find out there's even more of those tall, annoying people. We go into episode 2, which seems to make me seasick.
The ironic part about your description of episode 1 is until you got to the floating car, it kind of sounded like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Well, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, maybe.
So now episode 2, according to the Wolf.
Episode 2, in the Shepherd style recap, episode 2. Yeah, there's a lot of water. Made me feel a little bit seasick on the big screen. Met some cool clones. Got a little bit of an early view into the origins of Boba Fett.
Yeah, because we also called our buddy Steven Spielberg, and he said, hey, can you make the guys that make the clones kind of look like the aliens from Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Yeah.
But just taller.
Yeah.
Because my budget wasn't that big for Close Encounters, so I had to hire midgets to play them. Yeah. So make them really tall, but make them look that same way.
Jar Jar's in there again. Somehow managed to get himself a political seat. Worst mistake ever.
We do not curse on this podcast. You just said Jar Jar. Beep. Well, yeah. That is a curse word.
There was some cool lightsaber battles and a lot of unnecessary love interests, which probably ruined the prequels more than anything else other than Jar Jar. We get into episode 3.
But let's also remember, how long has Yoda just been walking around pretending to be crippled, but then all of a sudden he whips out a lightsaber and he flips all over the place?
Well, just like Padme lost the will to live, he got the will to fight. So anyway,
such a giant plot.
Anyway, episode 3. Finally, the worst kept secret in the world is released that Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader. Yoda gets an injection of ketamine or something like that and jumps around a little bit, gets some steroids, but then kind of gets fatigued. Padme dies, after naming the kids again. There was some cool special effects in the middle. So that is a beginner's guide to the trilogy, the prequels from The Shepherd and the Wolf, for those who...
And by the way, Yoda is friends with the Wookiees. We do kind of meet Chewbacca in there a little bit.
Yeah.
Han Solo's nowhere to be found, which is kind of weird.
No.
Or do I have
Not
my
really.
timeline
You
off?
got your timeline messed up.
My timeline's
Remember
off.
when Solo is
that's
set up?
right. Solo is
Yeah.
after that. Okay.
Yeah.
But you know,
Solo's like 3.1.
yeah,
in the
that's
movie
right.
list.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you know, if Yoda's so much of a friend of the Wookiees, why can't he just take piggyback rides with them?
Well, I don't know.
I mean,
again, let's forget the plot holes.
I think Yoda went to the DMV and faked that injury so he could park in handicap spots.
Well, going through the prequels, Phantom Menace, what is your favorite part of the movie and what is your least favorite part about the movie?
Favorite part of the movie is the podcast, or the
Podcast.
the podcast that was in that, right? Yeah, I don't remember what part the podcast was. Now, the pod racing.
Yeah.
I thought that obviously tons and tons and tons of CGI, but probably the best scene in there. Very close second would be the lightsaber fight between Maul and Qui-Gon and everything, But yeah, favorite scene. Honestly, I like the podcast. God. See, I did it again. That's what we get for being podcasters, right? I like the pod racing scene more than I like the lightsaber fight. I honestly do. Although, lightsaber fight with Duel of the Fates, sung by John Williams. I mean, great song. I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, it's close. It's almost a tie.
Right.
Worst part of the movie. Gosh, there's so many. Anything with Jar Jar.
Yeah.
Beep. Yeah, cuss word. Yeah. Anything with him and the Gungans. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely detest it. Hate it.
Right.
Hate it. Absolutely hate it. If Star Wars was going to get onto the topic of genocide, I would have been a fan of genocide against the Gungans.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
That they didn't just perform genocide and get rid of the Gungans.
Yeah, my favorite part of Phantom Menace is actually the lightsaber duel with Darth Maul. My least favorite part, other than the obvious, is I just think there are 100 different ways you could have done that movie, and that was probably in the bottom 3, just in terms of, you know, the way Anakin was found and how his background is explained, and
right.
You know, for the stuff for them to get off of, you know, the planet. For me, I just think it was just shoddy script writing. So I mean, that I know that's kind of a hole as such, as a WHOLE, but yeah, for me the worst thing about that movie was the overall plot. I think it was a very, very poor plot, and you've got a character as cool as Darth Maul, and he's on the screen for barely any time at all. Now I know in the original Star Wars trilogy, Darth Vader's not on the screen that much in Episode 4, but the thing is, the rest of the script and the plot was good. So that's okay.
True.
You know,
absolutely true.
Now moving on to Attack of the Clones. What is your favorite part and least favorite part of that movie?
Oh, man. Attack of the Clones for me was just honestly such a nap. I mean, it really was. I do like the scene whenever, you know, they're captured and those little monsters come out there and they're going to fight the monsters, and then the Jedi show up and you got the big battle, right? That's probably the best part of the movie for me.
Is it Padme's outfit?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Let's be honest. A little bit there.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
Princess Leia-ish.
It's not slave Leia outfit, but a little bit.
It was pretty
little
good.
bit. I'll give
pretty
it a little bit. Worst part of the movie. I mean, just basically almost all the rest of it. I mean, it was. Anakin being so whiny, and I don't like the sand, and
I hate the sand. It gets everywhere.
Yeah, and laying in the field, and it was just so forced, and there you go.
I think my favorite part was Obi-Wan's battle with Jango Fett.
Wasn't bad.
And my least favorite part was the entire romance thing.
Yeah, but remember, Jango Fett, who were the people that decided to make clones, whatever they were called, can't remember. They picked Jango Fett, right? This supposed just great warrior and all that, and he has this one battle, and he gets his head cut off, and then he got little Boba walking up there saying, "Oh, let me pick up my dad's head in his helmet and stare at it." It's kind of ridiculous. I mean, you go somewhere and let's say you're some kind of Scottish warrior and you're fighting with your dad and your dad gets his head cut off. Do you really walk up to the battlefield and pick your dad's head up and look at it and say, I'm going to plot my revenge?
Well, none of us really know what we'd do in that situation. But remember, he was fighting a Jedi, so it wasn't like he was fighting a regular person.
Yeah, well, yeah, but a lot of Jedis got slaughtered. I mean, and I know you're about to move to episode 3, but I mean, let's talk about the best and worst parts of episode 3. I mean, you've got these Jedis, and they're practicing this ancient religion, and they're all powerful. They've got Jedi mind tricks. They're using a lightsaber. They're doing all this. And then all of a sudden, everybody gets a text message saying, "Oh, execute Order 66. Let's kill them all." And then just boom, all of a sudden they all die. How powerful were these guys that somebody can send a text message and just say, it's almost like Twitter that somebody puts on Twitter, let's cancel Robert Downey Jr. We don't like him anymore. It was almost like that. It's like somebody put hashtag Order 66, hashtag cancel Jedi.
I want to know their cell phone provider was.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they never really had any messaging problems, did they? They were not using AT&T.
And this is a fantastic aside, which has got nothing to do with Star Wars whatsoever. But on the note of cell phone providers, I remember on one of Joe Rogan's stand-ups, and he was discussing Osama bin Laden and when he got killed, and he's saying that Osama bin Laden orchestrated the 9/11 attacks and all this from a cave in Afghanistan. And Joe Rogan said, I should have been focused on, the tragedy, how this could have happened, how it could have, got through all the, loopholes, all of this. He said, I should have been thinking that. But my first thought was, I wonder who this guy's cell phone provider is.
Yeah.
He said, I can't get a signal. I can't get more than 3 bars down the center of Main Street. And here's this guy in a cave in Afghanistan being able to broadcast and send out videos to the world. Anyway, that's a huge aside. My favorite part, Revenge of the Sith, I think, is the final battle between Obi-Wan and Anakin.
Absolutely.
I think
hands down best part of the movie.
Yeah. The worst part for me, again, was the romance and also the kind of, like you say, when Padme loses the will to live and the number of different ways they could have killed her off. And it came down to that. I think, again, it was just such sloppy writing. I feel like probably for all 3 movies, somebody tried to have a brainstorming situation and it's like, all right, there's 5 of us here. We've got 8 minutes to write down the plot for each movie. Go.
Right. And by the way, before we do this, let's all take 10 shots of Jameson.
Yeah.
So we're completely drunk. Let's drink, 12 alien ale beers from Martian Margaritas. Right. Let's just get so plowed that we don't know what we're doing and then write it all out. And then all of a sudden they pushed it in front of George and they said, okay, George, here's some alien ale brew from Martian Margaritas. I want you to drink this 6-pack. Then I want you to read this script and then go ahead and approve it. And he's sitting there saying, oh, okay, well, looks good to me. And then he signs his name off on it.
Well, I have to disagree with you there because I think if I had a 12-pack of alien ale, I think I would be that happy that I would have written 3 consecutive masterpieces because that beer makes me feel really, really good.
Excellent point.
Yeah. Now, jumping back to the prequels, and this is something which is discussed a lot, especially since, more internet usage since the movies came out. And this is the plot holes, which is why I was trying to dissuade you kind of going off on that tangent earlier.
Yeah.
Now,
well, see, this is why we should actually have pre-production meetings. But, why are we going to actually do that, right? So, okay. Now I realize why you were arguing with me. So, okay,
I think I only told you the topic about 30 seconds before we started the podcast.
Well, no, it wasn't even 30 seconds, but I appreciate you trying to give me a little bit of leeway there.
Anyway.
I mean, if we were a real podcast, right, you'd have said, hey, tomorrow we're going to do something on the prequels. So how long is it going to take you to go ahead and watch the movies and refresh yourself rather than walking
or even going on Wikipedia?
Give me something rather than sitting down saying, okay, microphone's plugged in. Yeah, okay, we're going to talk about the prequels. So go ahead and hit record.
Yeah.
So, but that's how we roll.
There's obviously lots of plot holes throughout all three trilogies, especially like the original trilogy. And
now, are we going to be allowed to talk about the later movies?
Well, we can as a reference, but only as a reference to the prequels.
Gotcha.
Right? So you can understand plot holes when you look back at it in the original Star Wars trilogy, right? But the prequels actually had something to anchor off, reverse engineer, and work from. So they really didn't have an excuse to have plot holes between the prequels and the original trilogy other than sloppiness.
That's true.
So what I found here...
And by the way, they had years of ability to go back and watch this. And we're talking about when the prequels were made. I mean, we've already talked about how many VHS copies I had, DVD. I mean, you've got... fandom out there that's talking about theories and all kinds of research.
Well, there was an entire alternate Star Wars universe by the time the prequels were even made. You know, they could have actually just followed any of those plots, which the fans had written for years and years, and it turned out
all the work was already done for them.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, there are dozens and dozens of plot holes mentioned on the internet, and I figured I'd just pick 10.
Okay.
And it wasn't all from one website. Some of them seemed a little bit lousy, and I didn't think it was really plot holes.
Well,
I just think it was somebody who didn't really think about it.
If you had to scroll down with your mouse, you weren't going any farther than that. Right. So whatever was on the screen was what you scribbled down.
I have a rule when I scroll down with a mouse, I don't reset my finger. If I can't reach the target by the time my forefinger has reached the end of that scroll, I'm not going any further.
There you go.
Yeah. So anyway, in Empire, Obi-Wan's ghost tells Luke that Yoda was the Jedi Master who instructed me. But we know in the prequels, clearly it shows it's Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but when I don't think about him, I get him confused with the leader of North Korea.
Yeah, he does kind of sound like that. Yeah. Maybe China put some money into the movies, but so that plot hole I could explain out that maybe off screen Yoda was doing a lot of the teaching and then said, okay, hey Qui-Gon, you go ahead and take care of this guy. Because remember in the first movie in episode 1, how Obi-Wan's saying, Master, if you would just, obey the council, you would be on the council and this, that, and the other. And so maybe Yoda was like, I'm done teaching him. I'm trying to get my handicap parking permit renewed. I got to look a little more crippled. So you go ahead and take this guy over.
Yeah. I don't think that really fills in that hole. This isn't so much as a plot hole as possibly the laziest explanation for anything in the entire Star Wars universe.
Oh, are we going to talk about midi-chlorians?
Yeah, Anakin being conceived by parthenogenesis, as in his mother says he has no father. Are you buying that story? I mean...
Yeah, I don't buy that story at all. That
she had a one-night stand with a sand person.
Well, I can't imagine it being a sand person, but yeah, something happened. I think there's a little bit of lying there. She just wanted to say, oh, I don't know. All of a sudden, I'm sitting here, and one day now I'm pregnant with him. And now he's got all these magic midichlorians. Now maybe Yoda is his father, and because of whatever happened, maybe that's what crippled him, and that's why the midichlorian count went through the roof.
Well, no, if the slave owner had been a human, I'd have been like, oh yeah, we know what really went on. But given it was that flying Pokemon type thing who owned, Anakin and his mother, I kind of I dispelled that immediate thought. So I think she got a little bit drunk on some homemade
some blue milk or something like that. Put a little rum in the blue milk. You never know. But you know what, maybe Yoda paid old Big Nose for the
one night with...
you never know. You never know.
Now I actually thought, given she was supposed to look a bit rough and didn't have any makeup on, that she was actually decently attractive for her. She was a bit milfy, I think.
I guess that's what happens when you get old like you. I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one.
I'm going back to 1999, not now, son. But do you think anybody's actually put on their birth certificate Parthenogenesis as the father?
Well, you basically got two people in history, right? You got Jesus Christ and you've got Anakin Skywalker. And was this maybe a reach by George Lucas to say, he's equal to Jesus? Because
I don't know.
Last time I checked, Anakin never changed water into wine. Right. So that would have been a good Jedi trick. Let's be honest.
Well, North Korea. I don't know if I don't think it's Kim Jong Un. I think it was his predecessor, his father. I think the propaganda which was put out to the North Korean people, I can't remember if he was the one who didn't actually have a father, but, and I quote this, and you can look this up on the interwebs, apparently he literally walked out of his mother's vagina.
I think I remember something along those lines. The propaganda in North Korea is fascinating.
But I still believe that more than Anakin Skywalker being conceived by parthenogenesis.
I do too.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's move on away from
North Korea propaganda.
Okay. Anyway, so Revenge of the Sith. Mm-hmm. Leia's mother, Padme,
right,
dies in childbirth again, laziest death ever.
Yep.
But in return,
lost the will to live.
Yeah, but in Return of the Jedi, Leia recalls her mother as beautiful, kind, and sad. Now, is she just going on hearsay, or is that just a huge plot hole they didn't bother checking out?
I almost wonder if that's one of those, adopted parents, that maybe the adopted mother died, and that question is never answered. Because you got Bail Organa, right, that takes over for Leia, and that's how she ends up being a princess and all that other stuff. So, maybe did her adopted mother die? But we're never really explained what happened there.
Right.
But yes, huge plot hole.
Yeah. Why is technology so much more advanced in the prequels than in the original trilogy? I mean, you think even R2-D2 has a jetpack in, Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, he can fly around.
He loses it.
So I read some deal a long time ago that said something happened to R2 and he got damaged and they couldn't repair it.
Yeah, but this is all kind of like...
I think that's sloppy writing once again. It's like technology advances over time.
Right.
It doesn't regress over time.
I don't think you should let the audience have to think this much about how you fill in these holes.
Right. I totally agree. Yeah, it seemed like R2 had so many more capabilities in the prequels than he did in the original movies, and then even, into the sequels.
Because some of these plot holes are so deep, I don't even think our friend Bill Burr, the Hole Digger, could fill them in.
No, not at all. They're much deeper than he's used to digging.
And taking into account...
And especially because he's going to eat all of the... barbecue from Smoking Windmill Barbecue
on the way here.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll let that slide until next time.
Yeah.
So,
Bill, we're looking for you.
Yeah. Bacon bits. That's what he ate, the bacon bite stuff.
I know.
What would have been probably the nicest
I'm still a little worn out about that.
I am.
Yeah.
I think I got over it a little bit. And now, I've got a little bit angry about it.
I don't think I'm over it. I think we're just going to have to show back up to Aurora, Texas, and grab some alien ale from Martian Margaritas and sit there at Smoking Windmill and just prank call Bill until he shows up.
Yeah, tell him we're going to buy him lunch, but instead we tell him we've both forgotten our Apple Wallets.
Yeah, and then we tell him he's going to park in a specific parking space, but dig a hole so his car falls in the hole.
Yeah. So, given the prequels were more aimed probably at younger age kids than the original trilogy was, you'd figure there'd be a little bit more imposition in terms of explaining why things, which is like why I said it's a bit lazy expecting the viewer to have to fill in the plot holes.
Right.
But in Attack of the Clones, it's strange that it was never explained why the Jedi Master, what was his, Sifo-Dyas, ordered the clone army to be built. Because you don't hear anything else about, Sifo-Dyas. And if he's the Jedi Master, how would he, without any authority from the Jedi Council, go and get millions of clone troopers built? I mean, surely there must have been a budget, right?
Yeah, but maybe it was one of those black budget items, that they paid like 250 million galactic credits for a galactic toilet seat, and then that's how he was paying for it.
Yeah, no, I know a lot about that stuff, but there's always a paper trail somehow. I don't believe that Yoda didn't get his nosy little face in there somehow and be like, item number 17. 4 trillion galactic credits.
Yeah, but then at the same time, they're saying, hey, Yoda, you need to go to the DMV and get your handicap parking permit. So
you're saying he's distracted and he let it slip. And he missed that meeting where they reviewed the budget.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
And remember, you had a bunch of the Jedi Council working from home. I mean, in the age of COVID we're in right now, you think about working from home as normal, but how many of those guys on the Jedi Council were phoning it in? I mean,
there was at least one, the one with the pointy head who looked like Conehead.
Exactly.
He was zooming.
Yeah, he was exactly. This was foretelling. I mean, these dudes are working from home. Yeah. They're lazy. Right. I think maybe a lot of it kind of like you talk about the plot holes. The Jedi's got lazy. It's like, I'm not going to hop on a starship and, get over to Coruscant or whatever and go to a meeting. I can work from home. I don't even have my whole Jedi robe on. I've got boxer shorts on down here. I've just got the top of the Jedi robe on so I can show up here, in a work from home situation.
Oh, Samuel L. Jackson was naked under that.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Now, I don't know whether this plot hole is really a plot hole or not. When Count Dooku tells Obi-Wan the Sith's strategy for undermining the Senate, I don't know if Count Dooku was just super, super confident that he could kick Obi-Wan's butt and kill him so the secret would never go any further anyway. But it seemed a bit strange why he would tell him the whole thing, knowing there was even a slight risk that if he didn't win this, the whole Sith's plan would have been completely thwarted.
I think the bigger plot hole there is, why is he the only Count?
Well, remember, he used to be Count Dracula, so he's got to be a Count.
Yeah, I mean, you got Count Dracula, you
Count
got the Count from the Muppets, and you got Count Dooku.
Right.
I mean, he's the only Count in Star Wars. I mean, it's a cool title.
Maybe that was one of his prerequisites for appearing in the movie.
I'd like to be Count Shepard. I mean, what a cool title.
So what you could do if you were Count Shepard? You could count the sheep.
Ooh, I could.
Oh.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It does sound like a lot of work.
Yeah.
Plus, I've eaten them all, so there's no point.
There you go.
Right. If Chewbacca always knew the Jedi were real, why didn't he tell Han Solo? And if he did, why didn't Han believe him? You look confused at that one. It's opened a can of worms, isn't it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, you threw a huge curveball at me on that one. Man, that's a good one.
Right.
You have stumped the shepherd. I don't know.
Unless Han was just pretending to know what Chewie was talking about all this time.
I know we've all sat at home and we're having conversations with the dog and we pretend like the dog is talking back to us.
Oh, I don't. My dog's stupid.
Well, yeah, your dog's stupid. So is my dog. But I have had some really cool dogs over the years, and sometimes you almost feel like the dog's talking back to you. Maybe in the early days of Han and Chewie being together, he's like, it's just a dog, I'm not going to pay any attention. And maybe Chewie tried to explain it, and Chewie's like, all right, I'll come over here and fly around in your ship with you, but you're not listening to me about this, so I'm just going to forget it.
Yeah, he gets
I tried to
gets
explain
frustrated
this.
quickly, and he probably thought, "Forget it."
Yeah, forget it. I'm done. I mean, it's like trying to explain some things to your significant other, and you just say, "You know what? Forget it. I'm sick of trying to explain this." So, all right, plot hole explained.
All right, now
Chewie just got sick of it.
Now the next one, we know that hiding in plain sight is a popular tactic, but why did they hide Luke on Anakin's home planet and have him keep the Skywalker last name? I mean, there must have been some equivalent of Yellow Pages or something where he could look, there's another Skywalker.
I mean, we're talking about all this technology they have. They can travel at light speed, but they don't have Google.
Must have had white pages online or something.
Well, yeah. I mean, they weren't able to Google, hey, by the way, hey, Darth Vader, dude on Tatooine named Skywalker. Name ring a bell.
Yeah.
And by the way, aren't you from that planet?
Sounds
originally?
like a robot chicken plot.
That one did bother me. Now, the only thing I could figure on that is, they're out in the middle of nowhere and they're trying to be moisture farmers, and maybe it was far enough away, because you never do quite figure out how far it is from their little moisture farm to the Mos Eisley spaceport. You've got the chop cuts in the movie, so maybe that trip is like driving from Dallas to Austin, and it takes 3 hours or something like that. So maybe they were hidden far enough away. But I do believe that couldn't Vader just either use Google and say Luke Skywalker or Skywalker Tatooine, and look, Luke's got a Facebook page.
He didn't know his name was Luke, though, did he?
Right.
Because he wasn't there at the birth.
Right, and so that's why I'm saying Skywalker Tatooine,
look up some
and search, and there's a Facebook profile for a Luke Skywalker that's about the age of the kid that I would have had, because I know I was having a kid, so maybe I ought to check that out.
And also you'd have figured, given he was the master of the Sith at that point.
Well, and that's where I was going with point number 2, that maybe he didn't even need Google. He could just say, okay, I have offspring out there. I know I've got offspring out there. And he knows
relatives have probably inherited, some
and of course later on in Empire, he can talk to him through telepathy. How didn't he just kind of try to figure out where he was by entering a dream and say, oh, there he is. Hey, let me hop on my Star Destroyer and go grab him. But I don't know, maybe, controlling the galaxy, maybe he got busy. Yeah. I mean, maybe he was a deadbeat.
Kylo Ren managed to do it, and he wasn't even related.
True, but, maybe
kind of related.
Maybe Vader was more of a deadbeat dad, and he's like, I know I've got these kids, but, I got a lot of work to do right now. Yeah. I'm trying to run a galaxy. I'm trying to build a Death Star, and he just kind of acted like, I'm going out for a pack of smokes, and he never comes home.
But then he knew in Empire, because, at what point did he know before he... Do you think he had to meet Luke before he felt that in the Force, that Luke was his son?
No, but I think you could look at it as that kind of deadbeat dad scenario where it's like, okay, well, I've got all this stuff under control, and even though, my first Death Star gets blown up, and now I'm rebuilding another one, I'm doing all this stuff that, maybe it took some years, and said, I've been kind of busy with work, and maybe I ought to think about my family a little bit more. Right. Because we're talking about 20 plus years, right? Maybe he's like, I got all this stuff under control. I built this Death Star. I've done all this cool stuff. I wonder what happened to those kids from that chick that I married a long time ago that died.
Right.
That, remember, in the prequels, the Emperor blamed on him killing. So maybe he tried to hide that in his mind and say, that was kind of a dark part in my personal history, so maybe I need to try to forget about that.
Right. Now this one is, I would say, a casting issue in some respects, but there's 20 years between episode 3 and episode 4, but Obi-Wan ages like an Asian lady, because Asian ladies, they look great till 45, and when they turn 46 they look 87. Because Obi-Wan, from Alec Guinness, from him...
Yeah, from Ewan McGregor to Alec Guinness. Yeah, but you know what? at the end of episode 3, they show Obi-Wan being parked on Tatooine, and maybe that desert life just kind of destroyed him. I mean, maybe it ages him fast. You look at a president of the United States, and they always do those before and after pictures, right? You know, you look at any president when they got into office versus when they get out of office. Maybe the stress of worrying, is Vader going to show up? I'm living in the desert. You know, I'm used to living in the Jedi Council with all this, you know, great food and all this modern technology. Now you park me on this desert planet. I've got to worry about Vader showing up every day. Maybe stress overtook him.
Now, how was he looking after Luke if, you know, he didn't talk to him, see him, and when Luke turned up, Obi-Wan was kind of surprised and didn't even kind of know it?
Well, he did. He did in episode 4.
Well, he didn't know he was coming, you know, kind of thing. It's like... because apparently there didn't seem to be any internet at that period in time.
Apparently there was a
that
communication
kind of
problem. Well, that's
there was
probably
no Al Gore in their universe to create.
Well,
the internet.
no, I think AT&T got the contract for Tatooine, and so the communications were just terrible there.
You're right. Yeah. So here we go. Last one. As Anakin, as you mentioned earlier, spent a long time building C-3PO from probably one of these Lego kits, because you do actually see other C-3PO type, you know, robots.
Right.
So you've got to think it's a popular kit they bought at the local store in Mos Eisley, right?
Yeah. I mean, they go down to Radio Shack, and it's like, hey, build your own protocol droid.
Why doesn't Darth Vader kind of recognize him later?
Yeah, but going back to what you just said, it seemed like a popular design. Right? So, I mean, if you have a black Toyota Corolla and you sell that black Toyota Corolla and you go 10 years later and you see another black Toyota
You'd
Corolla
at least have said,
drive
I used
down
to
the
have
road.
one of those. So.
Yeah, you might say, I used to have one of those, but you might not know if that was actually your Toyota Corolla or it was just another black Toyota Corolla.
Right. Problem there, he also knew who R2-D2 was, and he sees C-3PO with R2-D2. Now, what are the odds?
Yeah, but fair enough. But once again, lots of astromech droids. So, you know, you don't know how many droids that look just like R2-D2. I mean, even in Phantom Menace, where they're looking at R2-D2, and we're sitting there watching the movie, right? And we're like, oh, that's R2-D2, that's R2-D2. And they actually say, what is this droid's number? Oh, R2-D2.
Yeah.
So maybe a lot of them looked alike, and you had to have some kind of identifier to tell them apart.
Well, there were different R2 units, because remember, like, because Luke refers to him as like this R2 unit, because I think the one which blew up before he got was R2-D3 or something like that, wasn't he? The one which blew up before they actually...
No, that was R5-D4.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so that was an
Nerd.
R5 unit. Yeah, exactly. And now we're getting into my real Star Wars knowledge. But seriously, you could have had, just like a Toyota Corolla, they probably roll off, you know, 1 million of those a year in black, and they all look the same. Could have been the same with R2-D2 units.
Yeah, but
and
we
maybe
didn't see too many of them through the other movies, though.
No,
so
we didn't. But once again,
you
you've got a droid that's made in some factory somewhere, and they scatter them all around the galaxy. Maybe there's only a handful on each planet. I mean, you probably only have 5 Ferraris in South Lake, Texas. So you see those, but there's going to be more Ferraris in Dallas, Texas, more Ferraris in Austin, Texas. So they scatter them all around.
Yeah,
so
but you have to remember, he was a slave, and he could afford to buy build a C-3PO. You'd figured everybody would have one.
Yeah, but you know, he could have been gathering parts out of the junkyard too, where it's like, okay, I got my plans. Let me just kind of scrape the parts together, and maybe that's why he didn't have the skins. Yeah. Maybe the skins were the expensive parts, and everything else underneath were the cheap parts.
I think he had a pretty cushy slave life, to be honest. Not a real reflection of slavery, to be honest. You know, he built himself a freaking pod racer,
right?
A robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, I know. That's the bigger plot hole, isn't it?
Before we get onto this next topic, I know you don't need to use the bathroom necessarily, but would you like to go there and cuss a lot before we get onto this next topic? Because you know what it's going to be.
Oh, man.
You know what it's going to be.
Without you even saying it, I know exactly where this is going, since we're talking about the prequels.
Okay.
So, oh, man. I probably should, but I will try to refrain.
Well, let's not actually mention his name throughout this entire conversation.
So we're going to pretend like it's Voldemort.
Yeah, okay. So, this character...
I
in the
hate him. He's
prequels,
Canadian.
Why? Why do you think... What came over George Lucas's brain to include this character in the prequels?
Horrible comic service, trying to be funny when it's not funny.
Because there must have been test audiences.
You know, it reminds me of the movie Fan Guys.
Yeah.
Or Fanboys, sorry.
Right.
You know, when the Seth Rogen?
Yeah.
Yeah, Seth Rogen character has the tattoo of him on his back. He's like, oh, this guy's going to be the, you know what? It's kind of funny because I think the test audiences, the initial reaction was everybody's going to think this guy's funny. It's going to be the comic relief. And it just fell so flat, and almost ruined the entire movie.
Yeah.
Almost ruined the entire movie.
I hated him within like 2-3 seconds. I mean, I think I gave Hitler more of a free pass in terms of timeline before Jar Jar, because at least Hitler, when he first began...
you said his name. You said his name. You're not supposed to say his name.
No. But, you know, I mean, at least, you know, some of the great dictators in history, they at least kind of weren't instantly dislikable.
Right.
Eventually, they were incredibly evil and dislikable.
Well, they all started out as charismatic leaders.
Yeah.
This guy started out as
Let's just call him JJ, because we can...
Ooh, that could be a double entendre.
Yeah. So, well, I was actually going to ask you this, and then I completely scratched this question out of my mind, that in Attack of the Clones, how on earth had he managed to become a politician? And then I thought about our own Congress, and then I thought, that's a stupid question.
Yeah, you might as well scratch that one off your list, because we don't want to spin into politics right now, but I'm pretty sure I can give you a lot of examples as to how that happened.
Yeah, so that's actually no surprise whatsoever, that one. So what... I know everybody has their own reasons for hating him, and a lot of them overlap, a lot of them are the same. But what is your personal major beef with him?
He just didn't fit. He just didn't fit in the movies. It was so forced. You could tell that they needed somebody that was going to be in there and try to be funny, try to lighten the mood, not dissolve the mood, not turn the movie into a comedy, but needed a comic relief. And it just didn't work.
Yeah, to me it was like
Kermit
the Frog turning up in the middle of Titanic.
Right. Yeah. Oh, exactly. I mean, you could pick anything. It would be like Big Bird showing up in Schindler's List and just deciding, we're trying to escape. I'm a bird. Let's fly away. It's like,
but you can't fly though, can you?
Yeah, but why all of a sudden do we need this?
Yeah.
Where did this come from? It doesn't make any sense, and it still doesn't make any sense. And even Lucas figured that out, because in 2 and 3 he had much more of a smaller part, but. I mean, you go back and rewatch episode 1 and how much of that movie he is in that movie. It's crazy. And it's horrible slapstick comedy. And there was never slapstick comedy in Star Wars. Right. And episode 1 is so full of slapstick crap with him. Yeah. It's terrible.
Now, 21 years later, do you still hate him as much? Or do you think the characters in the final trilogy maybe eclipsed him a little bit?
Oh, they eclipsed
on your crap list.
They eclipsed him a lot. And sad to say, they actually did, because of the what I'll call the sequel trilogy. I hate so many of them so much more than I do him. I still hate him, but it makes it more tolerable. It really does. I mean, even us sitting here tonight talking about this makes me almost want to go back and watch the prequels again, because I haven't watched the prequels since I've watched the sequels, and I almost think to myself, you know what? The prequels were better movies.
Yeah.
They were better movies than the sequels.
Well, I think the opening 20 minutes of episode 7 was good, and I thought it was going to go, and I think there were parts in it, you know, obviously when Han Solo and Chewbacca turn up, and a few other moments, but
sure,
but
each one of the each one of the prequels and the sequels have their moments, right?
Yeah.
But you can't take those moments and say those were great movies.
Yeah.
Because they need to be able to stand on their own. A movie has to be able to stand on its own. If you haven't watched a prequel or a sequel, or you don't know the story behind it, a movie has to stand on its own.
Right.
And the prequels and the sequels suffer a lot from being able to stand on their own.
Yeah, there should be a certain amount of imposition whereby you can pick up the plot even if you haven't seen a
and this movie. And we're going to say it's no secret. It's no secret between you and I, but probably I'm going to say second, maybe third favorite Star Wars movie is Rogue One.
Right.
And that movie can stand on its own. You don't need to know anything about the history of Star Wars or whatever. You can show that movie to anybody.
Right.
And as a movie, as a standalone movie, it can stand by itself and be a good movie.
Yeah.
None of the prequels can do that.
Yeah. Now, there's an alternate fan theory that JJ was actually secretly a Sith Lord, that his clumsiness was orchestrated. You know, he was being secretly manipulative, and he was in alliance with Palpatine all along.
No, don't believe it. Don't believe it. And I have seen that fan theory, and I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
But I think it's some fan service to try to get people to not hate him as much as everybody did. And that didn't really come out until just before the sequels were announced and everything. And it was almost a way to say, hey, can we figure out a way to not hate him as much? And no, we really can't. We still hate him.
But you know, the actor who actually voiced him said in an interview, or suggested in an interview, there was actually some truth to that, but Lucas kind of shelved it pretty much immediately when it was brought up in a group session.
Yeah, I mean, I feel bad for the guy. I can't think of his name. I can see a picture of him in my head. I can't think of his name. But I do feel bad for the guy because, you know, he did his best. Ahmad...
You mean the guy who did his voice?
Yeah, well, it's not only his voice, but I think he even wore like a costume and walked around. They CGI'd the rest of him. You know, I feel bad for the guy because he, the actor, did a good job. He did what he was asked to do. Yeah. So it's not his fault. Yeah. And so he gets blamed a lot for it. So I truly feel bad for the guy with that. Yeah. But at the same time, not so much. Yeah. You know, I'm sure an actor in Hollywood's not going to turn down a role in Star Wars.
Right.
So
Leonardo DiCaprio
actually worked out pretty well for him.
Well, yeah.
But they're not all Leonardo DiCaprios.
Yeah. Now, before we leave the topic of JJ, do you not think it was a strange choice, really, if you're trying to appeal to kids, which obviously the prequels were,
right?
When you consider somebody like Baby Yoda in the Mandalorian and his obvious merchandise appeal, is cute, everybody loves him, and how on earth you come up with JJ as opposed to something like Baby Yoda? Because you could have had a Baby Yoda in the prequels.
That's true. You could have it in there. There wasn't a Baby Yoda. There wasn't an Ewok. There wasn't a Porg. None of that really in the prequels. But I think Lucas knew that based off of the original movies, people were going to buy toys.
Yeah.
They were going to buy toys, and they didn't need some kind of a gimmick character to sell the toys.
Right.
Even with him, I don't think the goal with him was to try to sell toys.
I think the Ewoks were probably a little bit going that way. You know. No, the Ewoks were, the Porgs were, Baby Yoda to some extent. I mean, once again, I think we'll probably eventually talk about the Mandalorian, but there were no gimmick characters in the prequels. Right.
It was more of that old school.
You mean in the original trilogy?
No, in the prequels. There were no gimmick characters as far as just to sell toys.
Well, Jar Jar was.
I don't think so.
No, I think it was to sell toys.
Well, maybe that was their original
was to aim
intent,
at
but it
kids.
backfired.
Yeah, it was to aim at kids.
Okay,
you know,
well, it backfired on
yeah.
them. And maybe that was the
Because I
thought.
can't for the life of me think, unless you were trying to sell toys, why on earth you would put... I mean, he must have lost his ever-living mind if that was not for merchandising purposes. And again, he misjudged it, but why on earth would you put a character like that?
Yeah, but, okay, so let's think about it this way, right? You got the Ewoks, you got Baby Yoda, you got Porgs, right? They're all small, cuddly, easy to make a quote-unquote life-size version that you can sell kids.
Yeah. As opposed
He-
to
he's like
punchable.
7 foot tall, lizard-looking
Yeah.
thing that talks funny.
But you
I
hope-
don't see it.
I kind of hoped
I don't see
ISIS
it.
would get hold of him at some point. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly, not to make the original actor feel bad, but we could have had Osama bin Laden play him, and I'd have been just
still
as happy.
would not have disliked the character any less. Now looking back, you know, obviously we're 21 years since the release of the Phantom Menace.
God, how crazy is that to think about? 21 years.
Now you've had time to digest, and like we mentioned earlier, it's been quite a while since you've seen the prequels. But with the release of the final trilogy, which we didn't like, and the standalones, which
Now hang on. Episode 7. I'm sure we're going to talk about these later, but let's be careful now because I liked 7. I didn't love 7. I liked 7. Hated 8. Didn't really like 9. So I'm not going to say I hated the sequels because I kind of liked 7.
Episode 7 for me was like going on a date to a really nice restaurant. I had a fantastic meal, but I didn't like the date. I didn't like her.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
I mean, there was enough fan service in 7 that I don't hate 7.
Yeah.
I don't hate 7.
Yeah.
But I don't love 7.
Well, let's take all 3 trilogies. Let's keep Rogue One out of it because that's unfair because that was one of the best movies. You can't
keep Rogue
stick
One
that in
out.
it
We're
and
going to keep
Solo
Solo
out.
out. We're going to keep Mandalorian out.
Yeah.
We're going to keep the cartoons out.
Yeah.
We're talking about the 9 movies.
Yeah. How do you think the prequels hold up in the 3 trilogies? Now, we know how we thought it compared to the first trilogy, the original trilogy, rather. But with the release of the final trilogy, how well do you think the prequels stand up as a trilogy in that set of movies?
Much better.
Yeah.
Much better than the sequels. Not as good as the originals, but much better than the sequels.
Yeah.
And so disappointing when you think about the technology, when you think about the backstory, when you think about the history, when you think about everything that surrounds Star Wars. It's extremely disappointing that the prequels hold up better than the sequels.
What is your most annoying, or the thing you find maybe not necessarily annoying, but regretful with all 9 movies? Just what, maybe, there's probably a lot of things. Maybe one thing which you're kind of a bit annoyed at George Lucas that he didn't do through the 9 movies. Doesn't have to be the biggest thing. Just one thing which you've thought about more than a couple of occasions. You wish this would have happened, and obviously with JJ, we wish that hadn't have happened. But
I think there should have been more Vader in 3, and when I say Vader, I mean Vader in the suit. I think they missed the boat there. Because until I know we said we're going to leave Rogue One out of this, but until Rogue One, you didn't really get to see Vader being Vader.
yeah,
And then that last scene in Rogue One, you get to see Vader being Vader.
Yeah.
And I think they missed an opportunity to put the Vader suit out there and really show how he was controlling the galaxy and how he was feared and all of that versus this kind of whiny character at the very end of 3 just upset about Padme dying.
yeah,
Because that's how you leave the movie. If you were to show somebody who knew zero about Star Wars and just showed them episode 3, and you say, okay, well, here's this warrior guy. He gets almost killed. They pick him up. They put him in this suit, and he's crying about his dead wife. That's all you know about him. You don't know all of his exploits.
Yeah.
And so you have that big hole. And I think, to me, that was my biggest takeaway with 3, that yes, it's cool to see the charred body of Anakin being put into that suit and see him become that Darth Vader iconic character that we know from screen. And if you look at some of the IMDb stuff about, you know, best villain of all time, it always goes towards Darth Vader. But they missed that opportunity where they could have ended the movie a little bit more forward in time of Vader being that true evil person that we always thought he was.
Yeah. I think my biggest fault, I guess, across the movies is that in the prequels, other than Palpatine, there wasn't a consecutive strong villain. Now, you think about the original trilogy, you know, you had Luke Skywalker, you had Darth Vader.
Right.
You look at the final trilogy, you had Rey, and you have Kylo Ren.
Right.
But in the prequels, you've got a mixture of kind of heroes, no one standout hero.
Right.
And really, again, the only kind of baddie you have right until the last moment is really kind of Palpatine.
Yeah.
And I think they missed out because we know now that Darth Maul survived. I think if they'd have had Darth Maul being the main protagonist through 1, 2, and 3, I think it would have added a lot more. You know, killing him off, I think, was one of the biggest mistakes in the Star Wars universe.
Well, yeah, and you've got that, and now you've got Mandalorian saying Boba Fett survived, which, you know, everybody wanted Boba Fett to survive.
Well, it doesn't say that he survived. They found the armor, but they could have pulled that out of the Sarlacc pit.
Yeah, but you got to look into that episode of Mandalorian when the guy turns around and that's the same actor that played Jango Fett, and they're saying that's Boba Fett.
But most people wouldn't know that, though.
I know.
Yeah.
But everybody's saying it's Boba Fett.
Yeah.
But it's almost like the fans are sitting out here saying, how have you guys not figured this out yet?
Right.
This is what we want to see.
Yeah.
Why do you not give us what we want to see? There's a reason why Hollywood has test screenings and movies have changed, because somebody goes in, they watch the movie, and this is going to sound extremely crazy right now, but the one that comes to mind right now is Pretty Woman. So when Pretty Woman came out with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts, the original ending of that movie was Richard Gere threw the money at her, and basically they, you know, parted ways and never saw each other again. And the test audience said, no, we don't like this. They have to get together at the end of the movie. And look, there's nothing wrong with surprise endings of movies. Quentin Tarantino is excellent at that, right? But you're still not disappointed in the ending. You're surprised. Surprised and disappointed is two different things when it comes to the ending of a movie. But some of the Star Wars, there's no surprise. It's just disappointment. Like, you missed the boat here. Why were you so lazy in this? Why did you do this? Are you just really trying to sell toys? Are you really just trying to sell movie tickets? Why are you disappointing all the fans? Why are you doing this?
Well, for me, it comes back to something I'd read a long time ago about the Star Wars games, Knights of the Old Republic. I don't know
video games.
I don't know if you've seen all the cutscenes added together on YouTube, and it forms almost like a full feature-length film.
Right.
That is incredible. I mean, you could make a movie, and it would be a great movie with all the cutscenes from those two games. Yeah. Right? And it's like, why on earth could he have not taken, because there was so many Star Wars universe books written. I mean, a famous one comes to mind. I think it's called A Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which I think was set maybe after episode 4 or maybe a little bit before. I'm not entirely sure. But there were so many great books in the Star Wars universe written. And even if you'd have gone back to something like Knights of the Old Republic, that type of a plot, you look into that, and you do need to watch it on YouTube. I think it's on the hard drive if you haven't seen it.
I think you made me watch that.
Yeah, I mean it's very long when you put them all together, but it's incredible, absolutely incredible. Yeah. And I don't understand for the life of me, given they knew how much of a blockbuster each one of these movies was going to be individually and as a trilogy, why it literally just seems like they sat somebody down the day before production began, gave them 6 minutes on each movie to brainstorm, and this is what they come out of. They didn't care about plot holes, they didn't care about audience reception, and it just seemed the most laziest writing. Now, I understand with the final trilogy, in the age those movies were filmed, in the environment we're in, a lot of things which ruined that trilogy was because of the era we're in, and the things they had to put in the movie.
Yeah, social justice, and what do you call it?
It was all woke. It was three
woke
movies.
I can't think of the term right now, but I get what you're saying, and it's unfortunate. Yeah. It's like so many shows, so many movies that you say could never be made today because of all virtue signaling. Yeah, that's the term I'm looking for. Virtue signaling. Yeah. That's what happened to Star Wars, and it's so disappointing.
And what surprised me about that is that Rogue One wasn't made too far away from that final trilogy in terms of when it was produced, written, and directed. Yet Rogue One, it's got the most diverse group of characters of any of the movies. Again, you've got a lead female character. Yep. You've got Hispanic characters, black characters, everything else. And yet that movie is perfect in terms of there's no virtue signaling, no wokeness.
No. And I don't look at that movie saying that, thank goodness that we have a female lead hero character. I don't think of her that way. It's a strong character. Yep. The whole movie, it's great. It's absolutely great.
And the thing is, just like the original Star Wars trilogy, you liked every single character in that movie in Rogue One. There was not one weak character in that movie.
You're absolutely correct.
I liked, I can't remember his name now, the robot.
K2SO.
K2SO. I liked him more than I liked any character, in probably, the prequels and final trilogy in terms of how they were on screen. Now, their original incantation, obviously I like Han Solo in the first, but in the original trilogy. But
and before we get too much in the rabbit hole on Rogue One, I'm gonna say this, and then we're gonna sum this up. But K2SO in Rogue One had kind of a comic relief part.
Yeah,
and you laughed at this stuff, but you didn't laugh hysterically.
It wasn't slapstick.
It wasn't slapstick. It was just enough to lighten it up a little bit, realizing that it's a robot. Yeah. And so he says some things, and you kind of laugh, and it lightens you up a little bit because, let's be honest, Rogue One's a dark movie. Yeah, it is. And so you need that a little bit.
Now, I've got two questions to ask you before we kind of wrap up with this. First of all, do you think a prequel trilogy would work if it went along the line of the Knights of the Old Republic or something like that?
Not at all. Zero.
Why not?
No, won't work. Disney has went so far to milking Star Wars now that they're going to have to spin off on things like Mandalorian, anything. If they try to go back in the past, they're just going to ruin more of the Star Wars universe. I hope at least they're smart enough not to do that.
Well, what I meant by that, I don't mean, because we know that Disney would probably mess it up, and especially if you put somebody like Rian Johnson directing it, then it would be, a train wreck. Let me put it this way. If, say, the writers and producers, directors of Rogue One were going to produce that prequel, do you think that could work? Do you think there would be a storyline there which would be...
So the only way I think a prequel would work is if you gathered the people like you're talking about that wrote the books in the expanded universe, and the people that are on the internet, in the forums, and on the blogs and everything, and you rented out a convention center and you locked them in that convention center for a year and got them to agree on what the story would be, it's the only way it's going to work. Other than that, not going to happen.
Sorry, I'm just finishing off this email to George Lucas. Dear George, forget what I mentioned earlier. He's not interested in it.
Yep.
Right, last question here, and I think this is a good one to finish on. Given that the standalone movies, Rogue One, was excellent. Solo, I think, was underrated. I think, the
I do
second time
too.
I saw that, I thought
Solo
it
was a
decent.
good movie, but there's a whole story, and I hope that we're going to do a podcast just about Solo. So I don't want to dig too much into it.
Would you like a movie about any of the characters other than Darth Maul or Darth Vader as a standalone movie?
I think Boba Fett would be a good movie. Pre-Empire Strikes Back Boba Fett. In between the prequels and up to Empire Strikes Back to learn his backstory. Yeah. I think that would be a good movie.
Right.
Obviously, I think a lot of people thought Mandalorian was going to be that story because they're like, oh, that kind of looks like Boba Fett. Yeah. And so they thought it was like a Boba Fett story. So I think that'd be a good one. Yeah. I think you could actually get a good movie out of Obi-Wan, which I hear they're still in talks. I hear Ewan McGregor is supposed to do that. I think that can be good if they're careful with it, but it could be horrible as well. I think another one that most people don't think too much about, maybe, but maybe they should, would be some of the other backstories from the bounty hunters from Empire Strikes Back and more of a story behind the Hutts in Tatooine.
That would have to be more of a general movie rather than a singular character, because none of those are really famous enough or popular enough to do a standalone movie.
Yeah, and maybe you have a bounty hunter type movie. Maybe have and I think that's where Mandalorian was kind of going with the bounty hunter thing. So we'll scratch that. Right. But if you had a movie surrounding the Hutts, but made it dark, made it a organized crime movie, almost a mafia-style movie, which is what the Hutts were supposed to be.
That'd make a better TV show than a movie, I think.
Yeah, but you know what? In this day and age, you've got a lot of TV shows that stretch out to, 10 episodes that are 40 minutes apiece. Yeah. That you could cut those down to maybe 15 minutes worth of good material times 10. Now you got 150 minutes. You got a 2.5 hour movie. Yeah. Just make it a movie. Yeah. Just give me a one and done. Yeah. I don't want to... It's like The Mandalorian. Look, I love The Mandalorian. Love watching it. I hate the fact that they don't release all the episodes, that I just can't watch them on a weekend. Now I've got to wait, just like we used to way back when TV shows came out. Like The Mandalorian, but would just like to go ahead and sit down and enjoy the whole thing.
Right. Now, that question was actually a two-part question, but we kind of jumped into the first part of it real quick and heavy. Other than a standalone movie for a single character, a general movie like Rogue One, if they were to make another movie which slotted anywhere in the timeline, say like prior to episode 1 or in between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, or after 3, and I'm talking purely about the prequels here, if there was another standalone movie which could appear, so either before 1 to kind of set things up, in between 1 and 2, in between 2 and 3 to fill the gap, or immediately just after 3 and before Solo, where do you think the best standalone, well, not standalone, but a general kind of movie to fill out the gaps?
Once again, Vader. I've got to go with Vader.
So just after 3 then?
Yeah, just after 3, before Rogue One.
Well, yeah.
Obviously...
Before Solo, then. So.
Well, yeah, before Solo, before Rogue One.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who you put in the suit. As long as James Earl Jones is still alive and he can voice Vader, it doesn't matter who you put in the suit. So you're missing out on the ability to have a Vader movie.
It's going to happen eventually. It's Disney.
I don't know.
There's money.
Yeah, but you know what? If James Earl Jones, and please don't die... Please don't die of the COVID. But if James Earl Jones passes away and they got to have somebody else go in there and voice him, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same.
No, but I think you can almost computer generate his voice almost as good now.
Maybe.
Just like they did with Leia in Rogue One. I mean,
Well, yeah,
it's almost
Leia
impossible to tell.
and Peter Cushing, same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we've gotten to the point to where we can have James Earl Jones go into some studio and just, read the quick brown fox jumped over the whatever, and we can replicate his voice.
Yeah.
But I hate to see it for him because he is Vader, right? That voice,
and
that's him.
The great thing is, I mean, if you did do a movie after Episode 3 and before Solo, say like 3.0, Episode 3.05, I mean, again, what we learned from watching Rogue One was what they did with, Grand Moff Tarkin and with Princess Leia. And this is even a few years down the line, that we could still have, the cast in some respects from the original trilogy actually in that movie making appearances where it needs to kind of support the plot.
I think that would be as much fan service as I would like on that. I think that would be too much fan service because you could do so much with Vader by himself without Han Solo, without Leia, without even Grand Moff Tarkin, without that, and just figure out why he was so feared, why he was so great, why we all know he was great, right?
Yeah.
They could make this movie.
They could, but you have to remember, if they make this movie, it's going to be aimed at your son Connor. It's not going to be aimed at 40-year-old Shepard.
Sure, but at the same time, I think the reason they don't make the movie is because they know they can't make the movie. There's nobody out there that can write the script. There's nobody out there that's going to be able to write the story. And it is going to be so overanalyzed that they know it's a failure walking in.
Maybe. I think it'll be made.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's bet 15 cents.
Okay.
All right, 15-cent bet.
With inflation?
25 cents.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And with that said, thank you for tuning into this extremely long episode of The Wolf and the Shepherd. We are nipping the heels at 2 hours, so we hope you stuck with us through this one. We get a little passionate about Star Wars, and one of the reasons why we've kind of delayed some of the Star Wars talks is we knew that we're going to go a little long with this. So most likely you probably paused a few times in the middle of this and picked it up, but we're happy that you stuck with us, and we'll catch you on the next one.